All right, hello, ladies and gentlemen. So in today's presentation, we are diving into how to improve your hiking speed. And we're going to be diving into some training, some strategies and ideas around how a hiker can best improve their pace and their speed when they're actually on the trail. Now, to start with, it's pretty obvious. Hiking is very, very rarely a race. For most people out there getting out on the trail, it's not a case of you having to go super crazy speeds or really trying to get PBs or trying to make fastest known times or anything like that. For most people out there, hiking doesn't have to be super quick. And for many hikers out there, the whole concept of increasing speed does seem a bit unnecessary. And you see this all the time online where someone may post in a Facebook group or on a forum and they're like, hey, how do I increase my speed on the trail? And 95% of the replies you get are people are saying, well, just hike at your own pace or don't worry about speed, just enjoy yourself and this and that. And in all honesty, that's fine advice if you don't care about speed. But, when it comes down to it, there are numerous situations where a hiker may really want to increase their speed. It may be a priority for them, maybe be a necessity for them. And there are numerous situations where, this is pretty relevant. The most common one is the kind of natural, slower hiker. And this is something that just gets overlooked by so many hikers out there who don't have issues in this space. But it's something I talk to hikers about all the time. And essentially there's lots of people out there who are just naturally quite slow on the trail. They just have a slow walking pace, have a slow hiking pace. And that's all well and good when you're going out by yourself. But what they find is when they go out with friends or when they go out with groups, they sometimes are always the slowest in the group and they feel like they're holding people back or they feel like they just never get a rest. And it's a really tricky situation. And this can ultimately lead to a lot of self-consciousness where people are just feeling really, really bad because they feel like their friends are always waiting for them or this group is always waiting for them. It can lead to a lot of reduced enjoyment because when we're hiking at quicker speeds, we can get tired pretty quickly. This sort of whole pressure of just trying to keep up with people and all of that can be can affect our enjoyment quite a bit. It can also aggravate aches and pains. A big factor that a lot of people have, particularly the naturally slower hikers, is when we're trying to push our speed a little bit more without preparing for it and trying to keep up with quicker hikers, that can often aggravate aches and pains and you come out of the hike just feeling really uncomfortable. And it can also be a bit of a barrier to participate. I know a lot of hikers, I've spoken to a lot of hikers who are basically just aren't able to go out with their local hiking groups because there are speed requirements or they don't like catering to certain slower hikers or whatever it may be. It can turn into a bit of a barrier. And this is a really, really big thing, which a lot of people overlook, but it's a perfectly legitimate reason to want to increase your speed. Now, other situations are hiking tours. A lot of people who book onto a tour or book onto a big trip, they do have certain speed requirements. If they need to make certain weather windows or sort of get through a certain amount of distance in a day, a lot of trips have this. A lot of people step into these sort of hiking challenge events like the 50 kilometers in a day or 100 kilometers in 2 days or any one of those things. And some people out there go into these events and they want to be really, really competitive. And they're like, hey, I want to place well. I want to compete in this and give myself some challenge. Other people in these situations, maybe they just don't care about their time, but there are minimum time windows on a lot of these events and you have to reach certain checkpoints in a certain amount of time. So people may want to improve that. Or even some people who are just on bigger adventures, maybe certain through hikers are like, well, in all honesty, I have to get through a certain amount of kilometers every single day or between campsites, I need to get through this within daylight. Some hikers need to improve their speed there. In any of these situations, putting some attention into improving your speed is probably going to be worthwhile. If you don't fall into these situations, if you don't really have any interest in improving your speed, well, why are you watching this video? But, just know that if people have sort of said, hey, don't worry about it. Hey, don't sort of bother about it. You don't need to do that. Just know there are a lot of legitimate situations where putting attention to this can be pretty important. So the tricky thing when it comes down to this is, improving speeds for our hiking and for our walking in short bursts isn't that complicated. If you just wanted to improve your speed in a 30-minute walk or a 60-minute walk and just get through more in that time, it's not very complicated. You can just go out for these walks and push it a bit quicker, a bit quicker, a bit quicker. It's not that bad. But improving speed for longer durations, when we're looking at multiple hours on the trail and even multiple days, it can be a little bit harder. Now, this is for a couple of different reasons. Ultimately, when it comes down to it, is every hiker out there and every person out there has a certain walking speed in which they are most comfortable at, a certain speed that they'll just naturally go to if they're left to their own devices. And this is walking, this is hiking, whatever it may be. I'll have a certain natural speed that I'll go out and do. My wife will have a certain natural speed she'll go out and do. You listening will have a certain natural speed, which you go out and do. If not thinking about it, your body will just default to what it's most comfortable at. Now, for people who are quicker hikers, and this is a naturally quicker speed, no big deal. Happy days. You're in a good situation. But if we're trying to improve our speed, this gets a little bit tricky. Because ultimately what will tend to happen is if we've got this natural speed where the body is most comfortable at, basically what will happen is the second we stop paying attention to our speed, the second we start looking at the sort of like nice scenery or chatting with a friend or whatever it may be, and we're not physically or mentally really concentrating on going quicker, the body will naturally just fall back into this natural rhythm, which again isn't a big deal if you're naturally naturally a quicker hiker. But if you're naturally slower, then we're in this sort of stop, start thing where we can go quick for short periods of time, but it can be a little bit tricky to maintain it. Now, on top of that is this natural pace that we sort of have and this sort of natural pace we fall into. It is almost always going to be the most energy efficient pace for the individual. Meaning your body loves to conserve energy. It loves to be as efficient as possible, and it loves to make sure it's not burning excess energy when it doesn't need to. So essentially the body just has a natural way of finding the pace and the speed of walking, which is going to burn the least amount of energy for the amount of effort that you're going at. And essentially the body's really, really, really good at finding this. So essentially this is another reason why the body will just naturally fall into this pace, because the body's trying to be energy efficient. And the tricky thing here is when we do try to go faster, we will ultimately, if we're pushing out of this natural pace, we're going to burn significantly more energy than usual, which will not only, make us hungry in that, but will lead to early fatigue, meaning we can't sustain it for quite as long. And also on top of that, as we said before, when you stop paying attention to this, when you stop physically thinking, I need to go quite quicker, I need to push it, the body's going to naturally fall back into its natural pace, which does make things a little bit tricky. And ultimately, sustaining these quicker speeds for long durations on the trail can get a little bit tough. So essentially to combat this, we really want to attack the body in a few different situations. Some people say, well, if you just want to get quicker, just go hike quicker. Yeah, in theory, that helps. But, we want to be a little bit more intentional about how we approach this. And ultimately, the way I like to sort of look at this is we want to attack it from a few different areas. Number one, what we want to do is improve capabilities to go faster, meaning just physically improve your body's capability to produce and sustain quicker speeds. Number two is we want to expose the body to faster speeds and gradually introduce the body to these quick speeds again and again and again and again. So this does feel a little bit more natural. It doesn't take quite as much mental willpower to sustain, and the body can get used to this. And also we want to reduce fatigue. And on the flip side of actually just physically going faster, the more time, the less time we have to slow down because we're tired or stop and brake because we're tired on the trail, ultimately that's going to increase our speed as well. So essentially we can look at these three areas: improving our capabilities, exposing the body to those quicker speeds, and reducing fatigue. That is sort of a good picture in regards to how to improve our speed. And that's what we're going to be diving into today. I'm going to break all of this down. So step number one, improving your capabilities to go faster. Simplest place to start is get strong. Now, ultimately, when hiking faster, our muscles and the muscles in our legs need to produce significantly more force. Every single step you take, you got to give a bit more oomph, build a bit more force to literally propel us along on the trail. Now, this basically can lead to, if we're using more and more force again and again and again and again and again and again and again, and we're not prepared for this, this can lead to early fatigue because those muscles are just doing more work than it's used to, and they'll fatigue early. It can lead to aches and pains, particularly in the calves and the feet. Those are the areas that often get pretty hammered if we're trying to increase our speed and we haven't prepared for it. Those areas can work well for, half an hour or something like that. But if you do more and more and more, they get really tired, and that can often lead to aches and pains. So ultimately, to combat these two things, really, really simply, strength training is a must. And, if you followed my stuff for a while, I'm always going on about strength training for hikers. And in all honesty, every single hiker out there should be doing it regardless of your goals and your outcomes. But when it comes to improving your speed, it's really, 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 really beneficial. Now, ultimately, if we can build up the capabilities, the tolerance, and the resilience of the muscles, and also the connective tissues, they will be better be able to support us during quicker hiking, and on top of any other situation in the trail, uphills, downhill, rough terrain, all of that. It's just such a good method of training. Now, ultimately, when it comes down to strength training, it is much, much, much more than, just doing a few bodyweight squats and lunges or a few hip workouts. This is the stuff we see from hikers all the time. And I talk to them. I'm like, they're like, hey, I do strength training. I'm like, what do you do? I'm like, oh, well, I do squats and lunges in my living room, or I've got some YouTube workouts I follow, whatever it may be. That stuff's better than nothing, but it can be so much better, and you can get so much more benefits from this type of thing. I'm not going to dive into it all today because, I've done loads of content on this and I've talked about this for loads and loads and loads. So I'm not going to be going too much more on strength training, but if you were interested in figuring out strength training for yourself, getting some ideas around how to apply this to best help your hiking in general, and also in this topic, improving your speed, basically I have a free little mini course, which you can get your hands on, which will break this down. And it's basically all about getting started with strength training for hiking. Now, inside this course, you'll learn, some more of the benefits of strength training for hiking and break down a little bit more of a broader context. It'll talk you through the principles of effective strength training and why just doing squats and lunges or why doing HIIT classes may not slightly be the best approach. And also it will teach you how to create your own strength workouts for hiking. So ultimately you'll get out the other end of the course knowing how to put together your own workouts to best help you on the trail. Now, this course is completely free. If you want to get your hands on that, go to summitstrength.com.au/strength-mini-course. And I'll leave a link for that below, and you can check that out. So if you were interested in strength training, I'm not going to say too much more on this video, but you can check out that course and it will get you sorted. So that's number one, improving our capabilities. Getting strong goes a long way. Now, step number two is we want to literally practice quicker speeds. This is the most specific thing you can kind of do for this type of training. If you want to improve your speed, we need to practice going quicker for longer periods of time. Now, ultimately, what we want to be doing is making sure this is regularly exposing the body to quicker speeds in the training. So not just doing every once in a while, but slowly but surely and consistently exposing the body to quicker and quicker and quicker speeds so it can get used to that. Now, ultimately, what it's going to do is if we can do this effectively, it will, number one, reduce fatigue when going quicker. So it will teach the body that we can be efficient when we're going at quicker speeds. So we won't quite get as tired. The muscles and the just body itself will feel a bit happier. It'll help the muscles adapt to these forces. As I said before, a big consequence of quicker hiking is aches and pains, foot pain, shin pain, knee pain. All of this stuff gets aggravated with quicker hiking if we're not used to it. So if we can sort of expose the body in our training to this type of things and help the muscles adapt to these forces, those aches and pains can get significantly less. It can also help the body and mind feel more natural at quicker speed. As I sort of said before, if we are not really thinking about pushing quicker, our body will naturally go back to our normal pace. If we can expose the body and mind to these paces in our training, help it feel a bit more normal, sometimes we can change that kind of set point and that default point a little bit, or at the very least, help it feel a little bit less forced for you to push these speeds. Now, ultimately, when it comes down to practice quicker speeds, a lot of people take this and first thoughts are like, all right, well, I'll just go out and hike super, super quick and really push it. And yeah, that's a good start, but we can do much better than this. There are a couple of common mistakes I see from people with this type of thing if left to their own devices. Number one is a lot of people will fall into the trap of just trying to push the speed every hike they do. And they're like, you know what, I went out a hike previously, I was too slow, I want to improve it. So every hike moving forward, I'm just going to go really, really quick until I'm quicker. That can work in kind of theory, but the drawback of that is it can suck a lot of the fun out of our time on the trail. And if you're trying to push the speed every single hike, you're going to have more fatigue. You're going to have less time to kind of look around and enjoy yourself. You're going to put more stress on yourself. You're probably going to take longer to recover. And with the drawback is if we don't feel like we're getting quicker and quicker and quicker every time, we can start getting really negative ourselves. So ultimately trying to push the speed every single hike, it can work, but I'm not a massive fan of it. On top of that, the other big issue is a lot of people just do too much too soon. Like anything with our training, if we just jump into this with a deep end and just do too much too soon, it's just going to greatly increase the risk of pain and potentially injury as well. So we want to be intentional around how we expose the body to these things and how we build it up as opposed to just diving in the deep end. So basically when it comes down to this, I'll talk you through a few better ideas around practicing quicker speeds and how we can be a bit more intentional, be a little bit more structured around this. So first place to start is what I like to call tempo walking. Got lots of different names, but I call it tempo walking. Basically, this is a really, really good place to start, just practicing quicker speeds and exposing the body to those quicker speeds. Now, essentially what it does is it just helps you expose the body to those quicker speeds in a controlled way, which shouldn't be too much too soon. So the key things to this is in a controlled way. It's not just being in the middle of nowhere and you're just pushing. And, sometimes that can get you into trouble. And it shouldn't be too much where, you're throwing yourself in the deep end. It's a nice gradual exposure. Now, this is really, really, really simple. It's a natural thing a lot of people fall into. But basically, all it involves is just doing some short local walk. So this can be around a local neighborhood, this can be in a park or whatever it may be. Anywhere from like 30 to 60 minutes. And literally all you're doing is you're alternating between periods of doing normal pace walking at your normal pace and then quicker pace walking where you're intentionally pushing the pace a bit more and trying to get that speed. Now, an example of this might just be doing 1 minute slow, 1 minute quick, and just repeating that for the 30 minutes or repeating that for the 60 minutes. Really, really simple, but very, very effective. Now, ultimately, the idea behind this is you start off 1 minute on, 1 minute off, or whatever you decide to start off. And then each time you do this, you just do a little bit more of the quicker interval. So you may do week 1, 1 minute slow, 1 minute quick. Week 2, you might do 1 minute slow, 2 minute quick. Week 3, you might do 1 minute slow, 3 minute quick. And you're slowly but surely just adding longer and, longer periods of quicker walking. Very, very simple, but again, very, very effective. Now, over time with this as well, so you could do you can introduce a bit of pack weight. So obviously there is a bit of a difference between hiking at a quicker speed with no pack and hiking with a quicker speed with a pack. So, you can slowly but surely introduce a bit of pack weight. And an example of how I often use this with my hikers is if they've got a big adventure coming up and they want to increase their speed, I might do 4 weeks of this of just body weight to start with, where we're just doing fast, slow, and slowly doing a little extra time. Then the next 4 weeks, we'll sort of pull it back and maybe go back to that 1 minute on, 1 minute off, but introduce some pack weight. First week, they'll be like, whoa, that's way more difficult. And then we'll add some more time, add some more time, add some more time. So we're sort of slowly but surely building things up there. So that's our tempo walking in a nutshell. Now, a couple of tips to this. Number one, first time you do this, the calves may get sore in the days afterwards. One thing that a lot of people will notice is when they're pushing the speed intentionally, the calves are the first things to do a bit more work, and they can get a bit sore afterwards. So if it does happen the day or two afterwards, don't freak out. Just give it time to recover, to rest and relax. Typically, it'll sort itself out over time. And another reason why that strength training is so important, because it can help alleviate this a bit. But one thing to be aware of, if this ever does aggravate foot or Achilles issues, if you've got a history of those things before, or all of a sudden those things start getting really, really sore, then you may need a bit of a different approach. This may not be appropriate for you if you're getting soreness there. It does seem like a pretty mild workout, but for the people who do have a history of foot and Achilles issues, sometimes it can be an aggravator. So if it does, then you may need to take a different approach. And that's when a case of saying, okay, maybe work with a professional, maybe reach out to, to a local physio or something like that. Get a bit more of a specialist approach or a personal approach, I should say. So that's tempo walking. Now, next thing we can kind of look at, and this is again in the sort of beginning stages of this sort of journey, is what's called fartlek training on your hikes. So essentially fartlek training is just a fancy way of saying it's a different type of sort of varying your speeds while training. I think the literal definition of it is speed play. I think it's Swedish. But basically it's just alternating different speeds when you go. Now, essentially, the tempo walking is typically done around the local neighborhood or in a park. But obviously, there's a little bit of a difference between walking on the flat surface or the manicured surface and walking out actually on the trail. So we want to get a bit of exposure to this as well. Now, this can basically just doing this can just help us feel a bit more capable and confident on the slightly rougher terrain, slightly uneven, or whatever it may be. Now, tempo walking in theory could work pretty well here, but practically it sometimes doesn't really work because, sometimes it can just be a little bit too structured in the sense that, sometimes the quicker intervals, if you're doing 1 minute, 1 minute on, 1 minute off, sometimes it just might not line up with appropriate sections. You may be on downhills where we don't want to rush too much. You may be on like dodgy sections, whatever it may be, might not really line up. And also number two, a lot of people are like, well, I don't really want to be looking at my phone for the whole hike or anything like that, which is fair enough. So this fartlek training can come in here. It's a really, really simple option. Basically, all it involves, and again, this is pretty natural that a lot of hikers will fall into, but you're hiking along, you see a landmark in the distance. Might be a tree, might be a pole, might be like a rock or whatever it may be. Essentially what you do, you're like, you know what, up to that rock, up to that tree, I'm just going to go really, really, really quick. I'm going to push my pace, significantly push it. You get to that thing, then you walk at a normal pace till you fully recover, then you do it again. And you can basically just repeat this as much as you want. It's just a nice, simple way of just getting exposure to these quicker speeds in this type of environment. But again, not putting that pressure if you haven't do the entire hike super, super quick. Now, the idea behind this, like with any other type of training, we do want some type of progression over time. And we do want to progressively do a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. So ultimately with this, if you are doing this on your hikes, just keep a track of how much you're doing. If on your first hike you did this and you were like, you know what, I did 5 stretches where I went really, really quick. Then give yourself the goal, okay, next time I go out hiking, somewhere within the hike, I'm going to do 7. And then next time I go out hiking, somewhere I'm going to do 9. And we just do a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more, and just making sure we're progressively giving the body extra challenge. So that's our fartlek training. Now, next one we're going to dive into is timed hikes. And this is where we sort of start to string these sort of shorter periods of quicker walking and turn into a bit more of an extended period. And this is essentially a really nice way to expose the body to this continuous quicker hiking, which in itself can be a very big mental battle, and also track your progress over time, because sometimes it's good to know how all this training is paying off and if I'm actually improving. So essentially what this involves, really, really simple. You want to find a relatively short local trail. So typically I say somewhere between like 2 to 3 hours, something that's not going to take your whole day, but it's a little bit longer than that like 60-minute walk you might do around your local neighborhood. So 2 to 3 hours tends to be a pretty good spot. Now, essentially you want to find a trail which has a simple track. So not something that's super technical, not something that's like, going to be really, really complicated, but basically something you can be confident, you can push the speed a little bit more without worrying you're going to break your ankle or something like that. Now, essentially what you want to do, start the hike, put a time in. You're essentially going to complete that hike as quickly as you can. Now, that may not be 3 hours of continually quick hiking, because you may not be able to sustain that for the entire time, but you basically just want to sustain as much as you can. You want to up your pace as much as you can, minimize the risk as much as you can, and get through that hike just as quickly as you can. It doesn't have to be a run, like it's not like you're running to the absolute limits of yourself, but we want to challenge our speed here. Then essentially what you do, you'd finish up that hike, and then essentially you just repeat this exact same hike once every 4 to 8 weeks or something like that. And ultimately every time you go out and do it, you want to just beat your time. So essentially we're getting a little bit quicker and we're showing our progress through the training. Now, in amongst all this isn't something I say do every single week, because again, we don't want this quicker hiking taking over our life. So once every 4 to 8 weeks. And then in amongst those 4 to 8 weeks, you just do your normal hiking. So go out on your hikes, do your fartlek training, just enjoy yourself on the trail, and then just stick these timed hikes to every once in a while. Now, a couple of tips on this. Number one, you really, really, really want to make sure to get the most out of this is we want a repeatable trail. So we want to be doing the same trail every single time, if possible, so we can actually get some valid results and see if the time is getting quicker. So ideally, you're not going to do this just hike that's ages away or when you're on holidays. Find something local, something accessible, which you can go back to time and time again. And on top of that, when you are doing this, as I said, sometimes mentally it can be a little bit tricky just to sustain continually pushing quicker paces, particularly over multiple hours. So just make sure to give yourself a little reminder, some type of reminder system to keep the speed up. So it may be a case of, okay, some people might just put a little reminder on your phone, just a ding every half an hour. Just be like, hey, hurry up. It may be just a case of writing a note on your hand and just be like, hey, quick hiking. Or whatever it may be. Just come up with some type of reminder system, which every once in a while can just give you that little kick in the bum, just to pick the pace up, just so you don't fall into that normal pace for like an hour. And then you're like, well, I kind of didn't waste my time, but it sort of defeats the purpose of this particular thing. So they're your time targets. And then finally, the last sort of thing we want to explore in regards to these quicker hiking speeds is specific hiking challenges. And what I mean by that is some hikers may be aware that their speed is significantly impacted in certain situations. And as I said before, when we're looking at improving your hiking speed, we want to increase your speed and increase your capability as much as we can, but also reduce the sort of periods where you have to slow down. And there are sometimes situations on the trail where this may happen all the time. Now, a typical example of this might be descents. A lot of people are like, look, I just super slow. I'm like a snail going downhill. Or rock scrambling. Some people just really, really struggle to maintain any type of pace when they're climbing over rocks or whatever it may be. If this applies to you, you probably can jump to an example pretty quickly. Now, if you're aware there's something like this that does stand out for you and you're like, you know what, I'm aware that there's certain situations on the trail which I'm just like an absolute snail, it may be worthwhile just doing some specific practice sessions on these types of sections outside of your actual hikes. So outside of the pressure of trying to deal with this and speed this up when you're in the middle of a hike, but actually doing some shorter sessions somewhere in your week where you can expose yourself to this type of thing and slowly build your competence and ultimately your speed. So an example of this is descents. This might involve you're the situation where uphills you're kind of okay, but downhill's really, really slow. So this might involve you just finding a nice steep hill locally. This might be a steep hill in a park. It might be going up and down, something like a big hill in a street or whatever it may be. Just finding something that's nice and steep. Then you're like, well, I'm going to do a hill session here. And essentially I'm going to climb up the hill at whatever pace I want. But because I'm trying to increase my speed on the downhills, I'm going to pay a bit of attention here. And essentially what you do is that you climb up the hill. First time you go down the hill, you just go down at your normal pace and just time it. Just time how long it takes you. Then you basically go back up to the top and then you go back down. But this time when you go back down, just try to increase your speed very, very, very slightly. Now, this isn't a case if you're doing an all-out sprint and just absolute power marching down the hill, because that may not be super practical and may not be safe for some people, but we just want to increase the speed just a little bit. And if you can just push yourself out of that normal comfort zone, just get a little bit of exposure, this is the type of thing, if we just chip away at it over long term, we can turn things over. Now, a couple of important things when it comes down to this. Yeah, as I said, don't go crazy here. Honestly, if you were doing this and you were doing like a nice long climb up, and say the hill took you 5 minutes to climb up, and then it took you like, I don't know, 4 minutes to climb down or something like that, then essentially what you want to do is just try to improve 5 seconds at a time. That's it. It's not a case of trying to chop 30 seconds off or 40 seconds off or a minute off. That may be doable for some people, but realistically, even if we're improving 5 seconds at a time, each week we practice this, that's an improvement. And over time, this can be really, really cumulative. So again, you just repeat this hill as many times as you want, and then just try to beat that initial time each time. Then next week, you just try to go a little bit quicker. Next week, a little bit quicker, and so forth. Very, very straightforward. Now, next up, we talked about quicker hiking speeds. We talked about getting strong. And step number 3, minimize fatigue. And this is often overlooked for people with their hiking speeds, but very, very, very important. In the sense, fatigue, when we get tired, when we're sort of low on energy, we will naturally slow down. We'll either just not be able to sustain that quicker pace, or we will sort of go into an even slower pace than usual, or we'll need rests and we'll need to stop and physically stop and rest. So fatigue is something we want to get on top of. Ultimately, if we can reduce the amount of fatigue you experience on the trail, this will go such a long way in regards to improving your speed, both to allowing you to access those quicker speeds for longer and reducing the amount of time you have to go slower. Now, when it comes down to it, strength training, quick training will help you. It will sort of, play a pretty big role in reducing fatigue, but we can do more. On top of that, we want to be doing what we can to build up what we call aerobic capacity. So essentially, aerobic capacity is just the ability of your body to produce energy for long periods of time with minimal fatigue, and essentially the ability of your aerobic energy system to produce energy. This is the single most important aspect of fitness for any hiker, whether you're trying to improve your speed or not. And ultimately, if we can build up our aerobic capacity and build up our tolerance just going for long periods of time with minimal fatigue and improve this aspect of fitness, you're going to have less fatigue, you're going to be able to perform better, hike quicker for longer. Very, very simple. So ultimately, the more developed our aerobic energy system is, the better. Now, the simplest way to develop your aerobic energy system, there's 1,000,001 ways to do it, but you're basically just thinking low intensity exercise for long periods of time. So some type of cardiovascular exercise that I can actually sustain for minute after minute after minute after minute after minute, and just slowly build that up. So examples of this might be loaded pack walking for a hiker. This is a simple session I get almost all my hikers to do. Whack on a pack, walk around the neighborhood for 30 minutes, 45 minutes, 60 minutes, something like that. Working that aerobic energy system, very, very effective. Stair and hill climbing, another really relevant one, going up and down a set of stairs or a nice long hill, very, very effective. This might involve doing step sessions of just finding a box or finding a step and just doing extended periods of 4 minutes or 5 minutes or 6 minutes of stepping up and down, then having a rest for a little while and doing it again. This might involve hopping on a bike or an elliptical or a rower and just going out for 40 minutes, 60 minutes, something like that. Or it might be involved doing some interval training. If you're doing sort of longer interval training where you're going quick for 3 minutes or 4 minutes or 5 minutes at a time, can be really, really effective. There's 1,000,001 ways you can develop your aerobic fitness, but just a general rule of thumb, if you're trying to improve your hiking speed, you want to be working on just your general aerobic fitness as well, because it's going to go a long way. Now, on top of that, the flip side of it, we talked about, general aerobic fitness, which we're not going to go into too much detail, but, that's a general principle. On top of that, some simple nutrition strategies can make a major, major, major difference to minimizing fatigue. On the trail, ultimately, when it comes down to it, pretty much most hikers tend to undereat on the trail, meaning they're probably, as they're hiking along, the body is burning a certain amount of energy as you're hiking along. Most hikers will eat on the trail, but probably not eat enough food to sort of meet the demands of you actually exercising. It's a really, really common thing. Now, in all honesty, most hikers don't really worry about this because you can survive on most hikes, really no matter what you eat. Some hikers don't even eat on the trail. They can hike for, all day and not eat a single thing. And they can survive, and that's absolutely fine. But if you really want to improve your performance and minimize this fatigue, then trying to get your nutrition demands matched up with how much you're burning a little bit better is a really good idea, and it can go a long, long, long way. Ultimately, really, really simple approach to nutrition. You don't need a huge amount of knowledge here. You don't need a personalized plan. There's a very, very simple strategy which can work for pretty much anyone. Ultimately, for your normal meals during your day of hiking, whether it's at home or on the trail, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, have a nice, well-rounded meal. Have something with carbohydrates in it, something with protein in it, something with fat in it, a nice, well-rounded meal, whatever it may be. Now, in amongst your meals, well, these are the kind of well-rounded and wholesome meals, we essentially want to think, okay, there are multiple hours in between these meals. And when we're hiking, we're burning a lot of energy. Essentially, what we want to do in between these meals, while we're burning those energies, we want to regularly be topping up our energy stores to make sure we never get depleted, and we are just making sure we're fully fueled as long as we can go. And we essentially do that by regular snacking and just snacking as we go along. Now, when we're looking at snacks on the trail, if we're looking at really optimizing our energy, ideally the sort of characteristics of a good snack are high carbohydrate. Now, carbohydrates are what is going to be fueling your exercise while you're moving. There's a lot of people talk about sort of the dangers of carbohydrate or worried about carbohydrate. If you are not specifically trying to avoid carbohydrates in your diet, do this. High carbohydrate foods are going to be the best thing to fuel you while you're actually exercising. Now, on top of that, ideally with these snacks specifically, we want to make sure these snacks, high carbohydrate, they're also low fiber, low fat, low protein. Now, the reason behind that, and when I say low fiber, low fat, low protein, you may be thinking, okay, that sounds fine, but isn't that the opposite of what's typically recommended for snacking? For people, they say have fiber in my food, have protein in my food, have fat in my food, to snack. And yes, in everyday life, if we're just sitting around the office or whatever it may be, we typically want fiber, we want protein, we want fat, because those things will take a long time to digest. They'll keep us fuller for longer and stop us over consuming when we're actually just sitting around. When we're actually exercising, we kind of want the flip side of that. We don't want fiber, protein, or fat because they will take longer to digest. Meaning blood from the working muscles will be pulled to the gut, which will sort of take a little blood away from the working muscles. And also it can be sometimes uncomfortable. We're going to just be slow to digest these things when we're actually moving. So ultimately what we're looking at when we're filling in these snackings, high carbohydrate, low protein, low fiber, low fat. So examples of this might be fruit or dried fruit. If you're not too worried about being super natural, you can sort of look at lollies, you can look at gummy bears, you can look at pretzels, you can look at biscuits, you can look at bagels, you can look at white wraps, white bread, anything like that. It all goes a long way. Now, ultimately eating these types of foods, again, it's not the type of thing we just want to eat all day, every day, because that stuff gets digested really quickly. Sometimes we can have these sort of like spikes in energy, which isn't great when we're just sitting around. But if we're exercising, this is fine because the body wants this energy. It's going to use this energy. It's going to fuel us for our exercise. And this type of stuff is fine when we're actually hiking. So ultimately what we want to be doing with this type of strategy is just to aim to have a bite or two of something every single hour. Simple. In between your meals, something high carbohydrate, a bite or two of something every single hour. This doesn't mean you have to have a full chocolate bar every single hour or something like that. But just sort of making sure you're getting a little something. Some people like, getting something every single hour is a little bit too much. So they may have 2 or 3 or 4 bites every 2 hours or whatever it may be. But simply just thinking continuously, topping up our energy goes a long way. Again, I won't harp on too much more about that, but that's the simple rule of thumb there. Now, coming down, we've sort of covered 3 big things. Get strong, quicker hiking speeds, minimize some fatigue. A few extra tips that goes into this type of thing. Treadmill versus outdoor walking needs to be talked about. Because when it comes down to it, a lot of people with this type of training, they're like, you know what, I'm going to do my walking sessions, I'm going to do my quicker sessions on the treadmill. Maybe that's all you have access to, or maybe it's just like pure convenience because you can go quicker and quicker and quicker, see your speeds. One thing you need to be aware of if you're going down this journey is there is a difference between walking on the treadmill and outdoor walking. We all know this, but it needs to be said and it needs to be highlighted. There is a difference. There's a difference how the body walks. There's a difference how body produces force. And there's a difference between these things of training. It's not that big a deal, in all honesty, in other situations if we're just trying to improve our walking. But if we're specifically trying to improve our speed, we need to pay attention to this. What this means is ideally, if you're doing tempo walking, if you're doing fartlek training, if you're doing the timed hikes, ideally you'll be doing this practice outdoors, around the local park or the local neighborhood for the tempo walking, on the trail for the fartlek training or the timed hikes, ideally. Or alternatively, if you really do need to use the treadmill. Some people, for weather or for convenience, they're like, I just need to use the treadmill. It's just going to be a part of my plan. That's fine, but just please be aware that the speed that you have on the treadmill that's on the display is not going to match up for you on the trail. Meaning, if you need to cover, I don't know, be able to hike at 6 kilometers an hour or something like that as a random speed. And that's the requirements for your challenge, or that's the requirements for your trip, or whatever it may be. And you've been practicing on the treadmill and you're going 6 kilometers an hour and you can sustain that for 60 minutes. And you're like, you know what? Happy days. It's not going to match up exactly on the trail. It's going to be a different speed because there's so many other considerations when we're on the trail. So again, this is kind of common sense, but it does need to be highlighted because I have talked to a lot of people who've been tripped up with this. If you're using the treadmill, that's okay, but just know the speeds aren't going to exactly correlate. Now, number 2, hiking technique. One thing that I would recommend is when we're doing tempo walking, fartlek training, timed hikes, or whatever it may be, one natural tendency for a lot of people when they're trying to intentionally increase their speed is just end up doing big old steps and just long steps. That's not a big deal in the short term. However, if you try to sustain this for long periods of time, sometimes this can lead to slight aggravation of aches and pains, and it can just get the muscles being used in slightly different ways, which can sometimes be a bit uncomfortable if you're trying to sustain it. What I typically recommend is when you are intentionally trying to increase your speed, what I would lean towards is trying to increase the speed and the power of each step, as opposed to dramatically increasing your stride length. So when we're going in those quicker bits, it's just making sure we have similar length in steps. It will change a little bit, but similar length in steps, but we just try to give the steps a little bit more oomph and we'll just be a little bit quicker, as opposed to taking longer and longer steps. It's not black and white. It's not like you don't have to do this, but I feel like that I find over the years that works for hikers a little bit better and has less risk of those aches and pains creeping up. Now, also pack loading. If you're using a loaded pack for any of these sessions, one thing I'd really recommend is please, if you're loading up your pack for your training, please make sure you load up your pack with water bottles, or at least 50% of your water bottles. So if you're halfway through a session or halfway through a hike and something starts getting sore, or you're getting overly fatigued, or something goes wrong, you can dump that water out and continue on. So please don't do timed hikes with like a kettlebell in your backpack and you get halfway and you're like, oh my gosh, I've got to, I had a slip or something and I've got the kettlebell and I've got to carry all this weight out. Use a water bowl trick. It goes a long way. And also music. Like one other thing, so if you, as I said, one of the struggles with quicker walking and quicker training is mentally just trying to keep up the pace. Because if we're not thinking about it mentally, we'll just fall back to our natural pace. One thing that can often help is quick pace music. If you have that in your headphones, that can actually just naturally keep us going a bit quicker. So you can use this during your time hikes, during your tempo walks. Not everyone wants to use this on the trail or whatever it may be, but it can be an option. Really simple thing just to keep your pace going a little bit more. So in summary, really simple to wrap this up, 40 minutes worth of this. If you're looking to increase your hiking speed, this is what I'd recommend. Number 1, get strong. Strength training goes a long way. For most hikers, I recommend twice a week strength training, anywhere from 20 minutes to 60 minutes. If you can squeeze that in, will go such a long way. Number 2 is practice quicker hiking speeds. I typically would sort of say do some tempo walking, maybe once a week, maybe at a fartlek training once a week or whatever it may be, if you want. Do the timed hikes once every 4 to 8 weeks. Again, you don't want to do that every single week, but once every 4 to 8 weeks. And then also practice specific hiking challenges just where you can. You can sometimes fit these into training sessions. If you're doing a stair hill session, you could do those descents. You could sort of fit these into your normal hiking. And if you're like, what, I've got some rock scrambling, I struggle on that, you could just sort of take a while, do a section of rock scrambling, have a little rest, go back to the start, do it a few times or whatever it may be. But fit in those challenges just where you can. And then minimize fatigue, work on your aerobic fitness 1 to 2 times a week. That's always going to be a good recommendation for hikers anyway. And snack regularly, high carbohydrate, snack something every hour or so. That'll go a long way. So ultimately, if we're breaking down training week here, 2 strength sessions, 1 quicker walking session, maybe doing a timed hike once a month or something, and then, 1 to 2 things of aerobic fitness. They'll end up doing like 4 to 5 sessions in a week, plus hiking, wherever that may be. That may seem like a lot to people. You can reduce this down, whatever it may be, but if you can fit that a week in, that's going to be pretty good, not only for improving your speed, but generally just improving your performance on the trail and your general health as well. So, it's a nice thing to aim for. Now, put this all together, and as I said, it can make a genuine difference. Speed can take a little while to sort of improve, but if you stick with it, you can chip away at it and intentionally, incrementally improve things, it can go a long, long way. So with that being said, hopefully this does give you a bit of an overview around how to go about your training and intentionally increasing your speed. As I always say at the end of these videos, sometimes, you get all this information, you're like, well, that makes sense. But in all honesty, I just have no idea how to put this all together. I don't know how to put together a training plan. I don't know how to figure out my personal situation. And I just want some help with this. So if you were looking for a little bit extra help, I would love to chat with you. Ultimately, through Summit Strength, we offer personalized training programs for hikers to help them get fit, strong, resilient for their adventures. Now, ultimately, our packages will give you a custom and personalized workout program to help you get ready for anything the trail may throw at you, and incorporating strength, cardio, hiking, and recovery mobility training, all factored around your life, your preferences, and your goals and your needs. Now, on top of that, we also do put a big emphasis in educating you on all the peripheral factors which can make or break an adventure. So things like nutrition, recovery, self-care, mental strength, gear strategies, pain prevention, a bunch of other things, and also give you the coaching, accountability, and support to help keep you on track through all the barriers that life likes to throw at us, the ups and downs of motivation and whatever it may be. If you did want to find out a little bit more, all you need to do is go to summitstrength.com.au/online. Now on that page, we have a nice long video which talks through our program in quite a bit of detail. And if you watch that video and you're like, you know what, I would love to learn a bit more and see if this may be right for you, there's a link on that page. You can book a call with our team. We can have a real thorough chat about you, your needs, your situation, and your goals. And if it does sound like something we can help you with, we can talk you through one of our packages which may fit into your situation and your life. So if you want to learn a little bit more, go to summitstrength.com.au/online and we can take it from there. So with that being said, I hope you've enjoyed today's presentation. I hope it gives a few ideas to help improve your speed and improve your hiking. And I hope you can take some of these ideas and put them into action. So thank you so much for watching, and we'll talk to you very, very soon. Bye.